Welcome to the deep dive, the place where we try to, turn these really complex ideas into something you can actually use to navigate, well, a pretty messy world.
And today we are tackling a big one, a really foundational text.
A huge one. We're going deep into Nassim Taleb's Fooled by Randomness.
And this book, it's so much more than just a book about financial markets. It's really a framework for, let's call it, cognitive hygiene.
Right. It's about cleaning up your thinking.
Exactly. It's this incredibly powerful attempt to decode why we, as humans, are just fundamentally wired to mistake sheer dumb luck for, profound skill.
And why we always see a pattern, why we see information where there's really just static, just random noise.
That's the core conflict. The book is essentially a manual on how to stop tricking yourself.
And Taleb himself is such a fascinating figure to deliver this message because he sort of embodies this tension, doesn't he?
He really does. On one hand, you have the hard-nosed practitioner of uncertainty. The trader who built his career trying not to get fooled.
But then you have this other side of him, the aesthetically obsessed, literature-loving human being who fully admits he's happy to be fooled by beautiful nonsense, but only
if it stays in the world of art and beauty.
Exactly. He knows the difference between what's beautiful and what's real, and that's a critical distinction.
And that perspective is really what makes the book work. So our mission in this deep dive is to basically run an exercise in applied skepticism.
We're not just going to be calculating probabilities.
No, not at all. It's about moving beyond that to really understanding and accepting a certain level of ignorance, recognizing that knowing the limits of your knowledge is, in many cases, way more valuable than the knowledge itself.
That's the heart of what he calls sophisticated probabilistic thinking.
And you have to face this really uncomfortable statistical fact he brings up.
Which is?
That often the highest degree of randomness is found where there's the highest compensation. If a system allows for these massive one-off wins, the person who wins is probably just lucky, not a genius.
Which is the opposite of how we're taught to think.
Completely. And that brings us to the initial paradox he sets up for the reader. The book isn't structured like some academic paper with endless data tables.
No, it's a series of thought experiments.
Exactly. And his point is so important. Logic doesn't require empirical verification. You don't need data to prove a logical point.
But the reverse is absolutely not true.
Right. Naive empiricism, the belief that you can just look at past data and predict the future, that desperately needs a logical grounding to be meaningful. If your logic is broken, no amount of data is going to save you.
So the goal here, before we even get into the numbers, is just to show that there's another explanation for success, an alternative to genius.
And that alternative is simply luck. We have to consider the hidden possibilities, the things that could have happened but didn't.
Okay, so let's start there with maybe the hardest concept in the whole book to really get your head around, alternative histories.
Yeah, this one requires real mental discipline.
So what does it ask of us? He's saying we cannot, under any circumstances, judge a decision just by the outcome we happen to see.
Right. You have to somehow factor in the costs of all the other things that could have happened. All the substitute histories.
Which is?
Yeah.
It's just not how our brains work.
Not at all. It's intellectually courageous because you have to confront an unobserved past. Think about it. The person who follows a really disciplined, logical process and fails, society treats them worse than the guy who took insane risks and just got lucky.
And that intellectual dishonesty leads to what Taleb calls alternative accounting.
Yeah, and the example he uses to illustrate this is just, it's perfect, the Russian roulette metaphor.
It's so stark. Okay, so imagine a tycoon walks up to you and offers you $10 million.
All you have to do is put a revolver to your head. It's loaded with 1 bullet and 6 chambers, and pull the trigger.
So that decision immediately creates 6 possible futures for you, 6 alternative histories.
And 5 of them are great. You're instantly immensely rich. $10 million, tax-free.
But one of them,
yeah,
you're dead. An obituary with a, let's say, very embarrassing cause of death.
And here's the absolute key takeaway. If we observe the successful history, the gun clicks on an empty chamber. What happens?
The public goes wild. You're a hero. They praise your courage, your guts, your risk-taking ability.
You become a role model. You're on magazine covers. The entire narrative completely ignores the 5 other non-observed histories where the story ends very differently.
And the people hiring these kinds of traders, they only see the Rolex and the sports car. They don't see the generator of that wealth, the actual risk.
They mistake that single lucky outcome for some kind of repeatable skill. And our brains, I mean, they desperately want to ignore those 5 dead alternative views.
It takes so much discipline not to just focus on the $10 million.
It does. And Taleb's point is that reality is actually way more vicious than this game.
How so?
Well, for 2 reasons. First, the fatal bullet in real life comes very, very infrequently. The revolver doesn't have 6 chambers. It might have hundreds or thousands.
Which is way more dangerous because it gives you this long, numbing, false sense of security.
Exactly. You keep pulling the trigger for years, nothing happens, and you start to think you're invincible. You get arrogant. And that's what creates the black swan problem. That rare, huge event that nobody saw coming because they just stopped looking at history.
Okay, and the second reason, reality is more vicious.
In the roulette game, you know the odds. The risk is visible. In real life, the risk generator is often totally invisible. People are playing Russian roulette every single day and calling it a low-risk investment.
They're just focused on the steady profits, not the hidden catastrophe that's waiting.
And this is where we have to apply that alternative accounting to our life choices. When Taleb compares a dentist to a rock star, he says you have to look at the expected value across all possible lives in that field.
So going back to the money, $10 million from Russian roulette is not the same as $10 million earned from a lifetime of dentistry.
Not even close, statistically. And this is because of a concept called ergodicity.
Okay, that's a heavy word. Let's break that down.
It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. It's about the difference between 2 ways of calculating an average.
Okay.
There's the ensemble average. That's the average outcome for a huge group of people at one point in time, like the average wealth of all dentists in the country right now.
Right. And the other way.
That's the time average. That's the average outcome if you follow one single person over a very long period of time.
I see. So for the Russian roulette player.
It's a non-ergodic process. The ensemble average looks great. If 100 people play once, most of them walk away rich.
But if you ask one person to play 100 times...
But their time average is 0, because they're guaranteed to die pretty early on and the game ends for them. A single path is ruin.
Whereas dentistry is ergodic.
Exactly. The outcomes are pretty stable. The path is repeatable. If a dentist had to relive their career 1,000,000 times, very few of those lives would end in total disaster. The time average and the ensemble average are basically the same.
So, in expectation, the dentist is actually much, much richer than the speculator or the rock star.
Considerably richer and more robust. Because their wealth is sustainable, it's protected from that one rare career-ending event. It's more real.
You know, this kind of thinking, this skepticism, it's not new. It goes way back.
Oh, absolutely. Taleb grounds this whole worldview in classical philosophy. He uses the story of Croesus, the king of Lydia.
The richest man of his time. This story is kind of the philosophical anchor for the whole book, a warning against judging success too early.
So Croesus, who believes he's the happiest man alive, basically demands validation from Solon, the wise Greek lawmaker.
He shows off all his treasures and asks Solon, "Have you ever seen a happier man?"
And Solon just refuses to be impressed. He names these ordinary men who lived good lives, died honorably, and avoided any major catastrophes.
Croesus gets angry, right? He demands to know why he isn't considered the happiest.
And that's when Solon delivers this just devastatingly probabilistic warning. He says he can't call him happy because, and I'm paraphrasing here, the future is uncertain and full of misfortunes. Your happiness could change at any moment.
He essentially says, I can only call a man happy to whom the gods have guaranteed happiness until the very end.
It's the ultimate statement on probability. You cannot judge the statistical run until the history is complete. Any happiness right now is just provisional.
It's a heavy thought. But the story gets even better.
It does. Years later, Croesus is defeated by King Cyrus of Persia, and he's about to be burned alive.
And as the flames are getting closer, he screams out Solon's name. Solon, you were right.
And that shout actually saves his life.
Yeah.
Cyrus is so stunned by this warning, and he starts reflecting on his own fragile fortune.
That he decides to spare Croesus.
So the lesson isn't just that luck is fleeting, it's that having a deep intellectual skepticism about your own success can literally save your skin. It can change the outcome.
And this must resonate with Taleb's background. He talks about his ancestors in the Eastern Mediterranean, who would see fortunes built and then completely wiped out in a single generation.
Absolutely. For them, this isn't some abstract philosophical point. It's a visceral, lived reality. They remember these sudden, catastrophic regressions in a way that people from more stable, modern backgrounds just can't imagine.
It really highlights that the robust path, the dignified path, is often better than the one that just tries to maximize profit right now while ignoring those tail risks.
The memory of ruin is a much better teacher than the memory of success. And in the markets, that memory is what helps you survive long enough for that ergodic principle to kick in.
Meaning that over the long run.
The lucky fools will eventually revert to the mean. They'll get wiped out.
Okay, so if Solon gives us the philosophy, how do you actually apply this in the real world? Like, as a trader?
That's where Taleb introduces these two fictional characters, Nero Tulip and John the high-yield trader.
And they're perfect illustrations of the difference between chasing profit and prioritizing robustness.
Exactly. Let's start with Nero. He is the sophisticated, quantitative trader, but he drives an old, beat-up VW. His goal isn't to make the most money this quarter.
His goal is longevity.
Yes. He wants to avoid having his entertaining machine, his trading career, taken away from him, so he is extremely risk-averse.
He has these preset loss limits, and he gets out of trades fast. And crucially, he avoids any strategy that could lead to a blow-up.
And a blow-up is the key idea here. It's not just losing money, it's losing so much more than you ever thought possible that you're just out of a game for good.
But bankruptcy. Account liquidated. You're done. Nero manages that tail risk above all else.
Now contrast that with John, the high-yield trader. He looks like a massive success. Savile Row suits, Ferraris, the whole package.
He made his fortune by earning steady, frequent, small amounts of money, month after month. He succeeded because he never really thought about his own vulnerability.
He relied on his quant, a guy named Henry, who built these complex financial models.
And when the inevitable blow-up happened, when John lost a multiple of everything he'd ever made in just a few hours, Henry had a mathematical excuse ready.
Of course he did. His model said the event that wiped John out was a 10 sigma event.
Which, under normal, bell curve assumptions, is basically a statistical impossibility. It shouldn't happen in the lifetime of the universe.
So this flawed model gave John this false sense of absolute security, which reality then came along and just shattered.
Taleb's description is that John's strategy was like napping on a railway track.
It's perfect. You get steady, uninterrupted rest for a very long time, and then the surprise train comes and the outcome is irreversible. John was never skilled. He was just lucky to be there during a long, calm cycle, a total randomness fool.
And this contrast gets us to the core concept of skewness, or risk asymmetry. This is so essential.
It is. Let's use the classic example Taleb gives, a game where you have a 999 out of 1,000 chance of winning $1.
Okay, sounds good so far.
But you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of losing $10,000.
So 99.9% of the time, you look like a genius. You're making money, you're getting promoted.
But that one tiny 0.1% event, that negative asymmetry, it wipes out 10 years of your gains in an instant.
And this is the crucial insight. People aren't paid in probabilities.
They are paid in dollars, in magnitude. The frequency is so misleading.
You hear commentators say, I'm bullish or I'm bearish, but those are terms for people who don't really get uncertainty.
Exactly. When your outcomes are asymmetrical, winning often doesn't matter if that one loss is catastrophically huge.
This reminds me of the Stephen Jay Gould story about his cancer diagnosis.
A perfect real-world example of skewness. His doctors told him the average survival was 72% after 5 years.
Which sounds pretty good.
But Gould, being a scientist, looked at the data himself. And he found the median survival, the point where half the people are gone, was only 8 months.
A huge difference. Why?
Because the distribution was highly skewed. The people who died very quickly. But the ones who survived lived for a very long time. The average had almost nothing to do with what the typical patient actually experienced.
So John, the trader, was playing a game that was positively frequent but negatively skewed. Lots of small wins, one giant loss.
While Nero obsessed over that tail risk, he chose robustness over optimization because he knew that survival is the prerequisite for everything else.
Okay, so that's the structural risk. Let's shift gears now to our own psychology, the cognitive traps. And the biggest one has to be survivorship bias.
It is the most insidious. It's the failure to see the whole picture because the losers, they just don't show up in the final sample.
It's the invisible graveyard problem. We see the successful people, we read their books, we see their interviews.
But the millions who tried just as hard and failed are completely silent. They are the denominator in the equation that we always forget to count.
And this isn't just about markets. This hits us personally. This is a powerful trap for you, the listener. Tal gives this amazing anecdote about Mark and Janet.
Right. Mark is a successful lawyer in New York, makes $500,000 a year, Objectively, he's in the top 0.5% of the country. A phenomenal success.
What? He lives on Park Avenue
Yeah.
in a building where his neighbors are worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
So his wife, Janet, sees him as a failure. She is using this completely warped, tiny statistical sample, her immediate neighbors, to judge his success.
And it causes immense emotional distress. We are just not wired to assess our success outside of our immediate little tribe or neighborhood.
Which leads to Taleb's very dark but very funny advice.
Move to a blue-collar neighborhood.
Exactly. You'll immediately feel richer because you'll benefit from the statistical distortion in the opposite direction. You'll be comparing yourself to a much fairer sample.
This bias gets reinforced everywhere, especially in those best-selling business books. He really goes after books like The Millionaire Next Door.
Oh yeah, he says it has a double dose of survivorship bias. First, the authors only looked at the winners, the people who survived and accumulated wealth.
And second, they make this classic error of inferring that the traits they all share, like persistence and hard work, caused the success.
Right. They see that all the millionaires were persistent. But they forget to check the graveyard. The vast majority of failed entrepreneurs were also incredibly persistent and hardworking.
So persistence is necessary, but it's not sufficient.
And if the attributes of the winners look pretty similar to the attributes of the general population, the really disturbing takeaway is that luck played a massive, massive role.
And luck is democratic. It hits everyone.
This leads right into the statistical mechanism of regression to the mean.
The idea that the bigger the outlier you are, a huge run of good luck, for example, the more likely it is that you were just lucky, not skilled.
And the more likely it is that your next data point will be much closer to the average. You will regress.
The clearest way to see this in action is the monkey on a typewriter thought experiment.
This one is terrifying if you work on Wall Street. Let's walk through it.
Okay. You start with 10,000 investment managers. They're all monkeys. Each one has a purely random 50-50 chance of having a good year or a bad year.
And the rule is simple. The moment a manager has a bad year, they're fired. They're gone. Into the invisible graveyard.
So year one, we lose half. 5,000 are left.
Year 2, 2,500. Year 3, 1,250. Let's jump ahead to year 7. After 7 years, you are left with 78 purely lucky managers who have strung together 7 straight winning years by pure chance.
And what happens to those 78 managers?
They are celebrated as geniuses. Their success is attributed to their incisive mind or their mastery of the market. They get huge inflows of capital.
But it was all just luck.
All of it. The terrifying conclusion is that a population made up entirely of bad or random managers will still, statistically, produce a few great track records. It's inevitable.
And then their luck runs out the next year, and they're replaced by the next crop of lucky monkeys.
Exactly. So if survivorship bias fools us over long periods, the constant fire hose of financial news is what fools us moment to moment.
Right, the toxicity of information. Taleb actually quantifies this, the difference between noise and signal.
And this calculation should fundamentally change how you consume news. He found that if you look at investment performance over a whole year, the signal is pretty clean, about 0.7 parts noise to 1 part real performance.
But what happens when you look more frequently?
The noise explodes. If you look at it hourly, it's 30 parts noise to 1 part performance. If you check every second, it's almost 1,800 parts noise to 1 part signal.
That's staggering. The implication is that the quality of information is inversely correlated with how often you check it.
More news is literally toxic.
Yeah.
It makes you overreact to random static. You're making decisions based on nothing.
And the media, of course, plays a huge role in this. They are paid to get your attention. Silence doesn't sell.
And they feed our worst biases, especially hindsight bias. We forget that when historical events were actually happening, they were confusing and noisy. They didn't come with a neat headline explaining everything.
He tells that story about the economist Robert Shiller and the columnist George Will.
Right. Shiller had been warning for years that the stock market was overvalued, a solid probabilistic argument. And George Will criticizes him, saying, well, if people had listened to you, they would have missed huge gains because the market doubled after you said that.
Which, on the surface, sounds like a fair point. If he was right, why was he so early?
That is classic randomness foolishness. Will is confusing a scientist who offers a hypothesis about risk with a prophet who gives you a time-stamped forecast.
Just because an irrational market becomes more irrational for a while doesn't mean the underlying theory about its vulnerability is wrong.
Exactly. And Shiller, being a rigorous thinker, sounds less confident in public because he can't just compress his complex idea into a simple, confident soundbite. The media filter demands certainty where there is none.
And this pressure feeds what Taleb calls the narrative fallacy.
Our brain is basically a story processor. It takes random events and forces them into a coherent cause and effect story to make them easier to remember.
It's the classic post hoc, ergo propter hoc fallacy. After this, therefore because of this.
We see the economy improve and we immediately say, oh, it's because the Fed cut rates last month. We just link the two events, whether there's a real connection or not.
And this leads to really dangerous stuff in finance, like data mining or backtesting.
Where you just throw a computer at past data until you find a pattern, any pattern. You might discover that a stock's price is perfectly correlated with the temperature in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia.
It's meaningless, but your brain is wired to see the pattern and believe it.
And we have to remember how statistically inevitable coincidences are. The birthday paradox is the perfect example.
In a room of just 23 people, there's a more than 50% chance that any two of them share a birthday.
Our intuition just fails here. We think about the odds of someone matching our birthday, but the paradox is about any two people matching. The sample space is much bigger.
So when you apply that to massive historical data sets, finding weird patterns isn't surprising.
It's guaranteed. You will find them because you are looking for them.
Okay, so this human need to create stories and generalize from what we see. This brings us to the philosophical core of the book, the problem of induction.
Right. Induction is this flawed mechanism where we infer the general from the specific. It's useful for compressing information, but it makes us blind to randomness. It makes the world look way more stable and predictable than it actually is.
And the black swan is just the ultimate failure of induction.
Taleb has that great joke about it. I have done a thorough statistical analysis of the life of President Bush. For 58 years, he did not die once. Therefore, I can pronounce him immortal with a high degree of statistical significance.
It perfectly shows how absurd it is to just extrapolate from past data.
And this deep skepticism led Taleb to the philosopher Karl Popper,
Whose central idea is revolutionary. He says verification is impossible. You can never, ever prove a theory is true.
Right, you can see a million white swans, but that doesn't prove the theory that all swans are white.
So instead of trying to prove our theories, what should we be doing?
We should be trying to falsify them. We come up with a bold conjecture, a hypothesis, and then we do everything we can to try and prove it wrong. One black swan is all it takes to refute the theory.
A true scientist is always looking for where they might be wrong.
And the danger of ignoring this is perfectly shown by the story of Victor Niederhofer.
He was the champion of naive empiricism. He believed knowledge came purely from past data. His mantra was basically, the market has never done this before, so it never will.
And his whole strategy was based on that, selling naked options, which gave him lots of small, frequent gains.
But exposed him to rare, catastrophic losses. It was a negatively skewed strategy.
He was maximizing the frequency of his profits while totally ignoring the magnitude of his potential ruin. And it was all because his historical datasets didn't contain the event that would wipe him out.
This combination of extreme empiricism and a total lack of logical, probabilistic thinking.
Taleb calls it an explosive combination. And Niederhofer's blow-up in 1997, which erased decades of performance in minutes, happened for that exact reason. He assumed the future would look like the past.
He forgot that the past itself was always bringing surprises.
So we have to throw out that old idea, natura non facit saltus. Nature does not make jumps.
Because it absolutely does. Life is not smooth and linear. It's full of non-linearity, where tiny inputs can cause massive, disproportionate results.
The sand pile effect is the best way to picture this. You keep adding one grain of sand at a time, a linear, predictable force.
Until one final, single grain causes the whole structure to collapse, a completely disproportionate result.
And this kind of nonlinear response explains how small, random events can lead to huge success through what's called path dependence.
Once a path gets chosen, it becomes really sticky, even if it's not the best one.
The classic example is the QWERTY keyboard. It was literally designed to be inefficient, to slow typists down on old machines.
But because everyone learned on it and systems were built around it, it became the standard. Habit and network effects beat out actual efficiency.
And you see the same thing with, say, Bill Gates and Microsoft. Taleb argues their dominance wasn't necessarily because they had the best technology.
Use network externalities. People use Windows because other people use Windows.
It's this vicious cycle where an early, maybe random bit of success snowballs and the winner takes all. And we look back and call that early winner a genius.
Okay, so the world is random, nonlinear, and asymmetrical. And now we have to face the fact that our own brains are just profoundly bad at dealing with all of it.
We are probability blind. The first big insight here was Herbert Simon's idea of satisficing.
A mix of satisfy and suffice.
Right. He argued that we don't optimize every decision. That would take infinite energy. We just stop when we find a good enough solution. We're boundedly rational.
But then Kahneman and Tversky took it a step further.
Yeah.
They showed that our mental shortcuts are heuristics. They aren't just imperfect, they're systematically flawed. They lead to predictable, irrational mistakes.
And it's because our minds aren't these single logical computers. They're a collection of emotional modules.
Which is why pure logic doesn't work.
Yeah.
He brings up Damasio's work in Descartes' error.
Yeah, people with brain injuries that remove their emotions, they can't even make simple decisions. Emotions are like the lubricants of reason. They let us make fast choices.
We feel the emotion first, and then our rational brain scrambles to come up with an explanation for it later.
And you can see this flaw so clearly when you test people, even experts, with the base rate fallacy test.
This one is amazing. The failure rate among doctors is shocking.
Let's walk through it because it just breaks your intuition. So a disease strikes 1 in 1,000 people. There's a test for it that has a 5% false positive rate.
Meaning 5% of healthy people will incorrectly test positive. So a patient comes in, tests positive. What's the probability they actually have the disease?
Your gut says it's really high, like 95%. Right, the test is accurate. But you're forgetting the base rate, the rarity of the disease.
Let's use a group of 1,000 people to make it simple.
Okay, so out of 1,000 people, only one person actually has the disease.
And what about the 999 healthy people?
Well, 5% of them will get a false positive. So that's roughly 50 healthy people who incorrectly test positive.
So in the pool of positive tests, you have 51 people total. The one sick person and the 50 false positives.
Which means the probability that your patient actually has the disease, given the positive test, is 1 out of 51, which is about
2%.
2%. Our brains just ignore the abstract base rate and latch onto the concrete data point in front of us.
In trading, this shows up all the time. There's anchoring, the I'm as good as my last trade effect.
Where you react to the changes from some random reference point, the price you bought at, instead of the big picture.
And loss aversion. This one dictates which strategies feel good to us.
Right. It feels really bad to lose big ones.
Yeah.
But our sensitivity to losses goes down if they're small and frequent. So we are hedonistically drawn to strategies that have lots of small wins and rare big losses.
Even if they're totally irrational economically, John the trader felt great every single day, right up until the day he was ruined.
So if our brains are flawed and the world is random, how are we supposed to live? How do we make decisions?
And Taleb's answer is robustness and dignity.
First, you have to recognize the inverse skills problem. This is his critique of corporate life. The higher you go up the ladder, to CEO, for example, the higher the pay.
But the lower the actual evidence of your skill contributing to the outcome.
A CEO's big decisions are not repeatable. They are one-off, high-stakes bets on a random future. We pay them for the outcome of that bet, not for a measurable process.
Whereas a cook or a factory worker, their work is repetitive. Their skill is testable and measurable over time. There's ergodicity.
So the antidote to all this pressure is to actually embrace uncertainty, to see the good side of it.
I love the commuter example he gives, the suburban commuter who tries to optimize his schedule down to the second. He's stressed. He's anxious about a 1-minute delay.
Compare him to the subway rider who doesn't have a precise timetable. They're forced to be a satisficer, not a maximizer.
They just accept that the next train will come soon enough.
And that uncertainty protects them from the self-imposed pressure to be optimal all the time, which, ironically, probably leads to a happier, less anxious life. Resisting the urge to optimize everything might be the only way to find peace.
Uncertainty can also be a strategic tool, right? Like scrambling messages.
Exactly. A central bank that allows a little bit of unpredictable noise around its currency peg makes it harder for speculators to attack. A little bit of unpredictability can be a powerful deterrent.
So at the end of the day, the solution isn't more data or better calculations.
No, it's dignity and personal elegance, what he calls savoir-faire, knowing how to live.
And for Taleb, dignity is the execution of a protocol of behavior that does not depend on the immediate circumstance.
It's grace under pressure, and it requires you to admit your own emotional weakness, to use what he calls the Odyssean mute command.
Like Odysseus tying himself to the mast to resist the siren's song.
Exactly. Nero, the good trader, practiced this by filling his ears with wax. He just avoided the toxic media, the noise, the emotional chatter. He knew he wasn't strong enough to fight his emotions in the moment, so he took preemptive action.
It's kind of practical stoicism.
And the ultimate expression of that comes from a poem by Cavafy about Mark Antony after his final defeat.
The poem advises Anthony not to mourn his bad luck or deny what's happened, but to follow the dignified path.
To accept that the city of his fortune has fallen, and to just walk away with grace without complaining.
It's the highest form of stoicism. You're going to feel the pain. We're built to have emotions.
But the dignified path is to accept the outcome without sacrificing your personal elegance. It's about maintaining internal control when you have no external control.
So the thread connecting all of this, from ancient kings to modern traders, it seems to be this hidden vulnerability in any success that isn't repeatable.
I think so. The core generator of all our foolishness, Taleb says, is that we favor the visible, the embedded, the personal, the narrated, and the tangible. We scorn the abstract.
And this whole deep dive has been an exercise in moving from those visible narrated outcomes, the rich lawyer, the trader with the Ferrari, to the abstract, unseen possibilities.
The 5 deadly chambers in the revolver, the invisible graveyard of failures, the hidden skewness that can lead to ruin. Real knowledge is just recognizing the world is so much more random than our brains want us to believe.
And here's a final thought for you to chew on, especially when it comes to taking advice from experts. We love the idea of science and progress.
But we have to be deeply skeptical of individual scientists and practitioners.
This is the really humbling part. Taleb suggests that new knowledge doesn't really take hold in a field until the old, flawed knowledge literally dies out.
He says science evolves from funeral to funeral.
Wow.
The next great idea in finance will probably only emerge after the current flawed theories have caused another crisis, and their proponents have been forced to retire, taking their bad ideas with them.
That's a sobering thought about the nature of progress.
It is. It means we have to always remember that the possibility of being fooled is ever present.
If you want a shorter visual summary of this book, you can find the link in the description.